Hello, and welcome to Bookends number 13.
Lucky 13.
And what has everybody been up to? Kathy?
Well, this weekend I spent up a tree. I kind of camped in a tree house.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, it was. It was nice and dry in the tree house, but it was very, very wet under it. So
Because Maryland seems to be experiencing
Waterlogged.
Almost like a
Deluge.
Seattle-type weather pattern.
it's just a deluge. So yeah, I had to trudge through the mud to get to the treehouse and back out to the car, back and forth. So that was the worst part about it.
Where was this?
Thurmont, Maryland, where it's very rural. There are state parks out there. We visited Cunningham Falls State Park and covered bridges, that sort of thing.
That's near Camp David, isn't it?
Yes, they did not want us coming into Camp David. We tried and
Go visit the president?
well, he wasn't there. Yeah, they don't want visitors at Camp David. They
I
made
think
that very clear.
I think that's also pretty close to where Blair Witch Project was. It's Burkittsville.
Burkittsville, yeah.
Yeah, which
But-
is...
It's not too far from where we were. So, yeah, that was a different experience. It was fun. It was primitive, but I think we can check that off of our bucket list and move on to a hotel room next time.
Right.
And what about you, Mom? What have you been up to?
Well, I attended a talk at the Cecil County Library, and it was very interesting. It was a historian by the name of Tom Dixon who came and spoke to the people of Cecil County about the cold case histories that are still open, some of them from the 1700s in Cecil County, and it was really an interesting talk. It's too bad he only had an hour to talk, and we could have listened to him for 2 or 3 more hours than he gave, but it was well received. There were standing room only.
Wow, I wish I could have went.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very interesting talk. And then afterwards, I asked him for the slides that he presented, and he sent them to me. I haven't finished reading through those.
Oh, you're going to try to solve them all?
I'm going to solve all of them.
If anybody could.
You know me, I'm get my teeth in the bone. I'm not going to
And
let
dark
go.
on the case.
That's right. And Tracy?
Well, I haven't done much. By the time this gets released, we would have already attended the Collingswood Book Festival. But something we did to prepare for that is we did pretzels to have at our booth. We chocolate dipped 140 pretzels. Mom, my niece Skylar, and myself, we were up until 1 o'clock in the morning dipping 1:30 in the morning dipping pretzels. But it was fun. We had a good time.
We did have a good time. Kathy went up a tree to get
Yeah.
away from it, so she didn't have to do it.
Sorry, I missed that.
We're going to have an interview with the author, Dennis Palumbo. Dennis Palumbo is a writer and licensed psychotherapist in private practice, specializing in creative issues. His acclaimed series of mystery thrillers, Mirror Image, Fever Dream, Night Terrors, Phantom Limb, and his latest, Head Wounds, feature psychologist Daniel Rinaldi. He is also the author of Writing from the Inside Out, which he wrote under John Wiley, and a short story collection, From Crime to Crime, that was put out by Tallfellow Press. Formerly a Hollywood screenwriter, his credits include the feature film My Favorite Year, for which he was nominated for a WGA award for Best Screenplay. He was also a staff writer for the ABC TV series Welcome Back, Kotter, and has written numerous series, episodes, and pilots. His first book, City Wars, is now available as an ebook, and his short fiction has appeared in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. He provides articles and reviews for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Lancet, and many others. His column, The Writer's Life, appears monthly for 6 years in Written By, the magazine of the Writers Guild of America. He's also done commentary for NPR's All Things Considered. Currently, he writes Hollywood on the Couch column for the Psychology Today website and blogs for the Huffington Post. So we'll jump into our interview. I hope you enjoy. We definitely did. Here you go.
Tonight, we are just thrilled to be able to introduce Dennis Palumbo. He has a very storied career, first writing for television and movies and films. He decided to switch careers and become a clinical psychologist. Is that true, Dennis?
I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California. It's the same as a psychologist. I treat individuals, couples, families.
Okay.
In my particular case, because I was a film and TV writer, my practice specializes in creative people. I primarily have writers, actors, directors, composers, journalists, novelists. About 80 to 85% of my practice is made up of people in the creative arts.
Ooh, it's too bad you have confidentiality. You could give us some dirt.
I know. I had a reporter one time, Parade Magazine, say, "Can you tell me who some of the people you treat?" And I said, "No." And he said, "How about just their initials?" He said, "How about the ones that are now dead?" And I said, "No." He was very upset with me.
Okay, well, maybe you fictionalize some of your stories?
Well, I don't use the people from my practice in my mystery novels at all. I don't use them at all. I have people and characters in my novels that have some of the same traits or maybe have some similar issues, but those issues are common to all people, not just my practice. Frankly, in terms of people with psychosis and megalomania and narcissism, I saw many more of those types during my Hollywood career than I have here as a therapist.
Oh, I bet.
I remember my first internship was at a psychiatric facility where I was working with schizophrenics, and someone asked me if that had been particularly difficult or surprising. And, you know, I'd worked with studio executives and network executives and producers for 17 years, so schizophrenics were easy. So I didn't see it as that big of a deal.
Can see that. I hear they can be quite difficult to work with.
You know, on the one hand, that's true. On the other hand, if I were a studio executive or a network executive, the pressure to succeed, to get big ratings, to get big box office, that's no fun either. I'm much more aware now that I've been a therapist for almost 30 years, and I've had patients who are executives and producers, and it's no easy road for them either. I don't think it's easy for anyone in Hollywood because the pressures are so big, the stakes are so high, and there's so much money involved.
Absolutely.
Sure.
That's true. Well, so along with your psychotherapy practice, you also write a series of mystery novels, which we've been enjoying. Daniel Rinaldi.
Yes, I write a series of novels about a psychologist and trauma expert named Daniel Rinaldi, who, like me, was born and raised in Pittsburgh and went to Pitt. And even though I lived in Los Angeles for many, many years, I love my hometown. And so I set the series of novels in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has changed so much from when I lived there. I mean, when I was in college, I worked my way through Pitt working in a steel mill, which, of course, there's no steel mills there anymore. So the whole city has changed. The way I think I described it is a shot in a beer town that's collided with the information age, because now it's quite gentrified. Right now, it's a hub of big medical discoveries. I think it's the #1 place in the world for organ transplantation. It's state-of-the-art for nanotechnology. And right now, it leads the world in robotic development. When you think about it, it's a town that was very blue-collar for a very long time, but it's also incredibly endowed with wealthy benefactors. It has the Mellons and the Scaife and the Carnegies and the Hineses. And that's why there's so many wonderful things in Pittsburgh in terms of museums and theaters and opera houses, because there's just so much endowment money. Plus, you have 2 great universities, the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. It has 2 world-class universities as well. It's really changed. And yet, you'll go downtown where it's all been built up and it looks very, sparkly and new. And 2 streets over, there'll be an old neighborhood where the cobblestone streets are still there and the streetcar tracks are still embedded in them from when streetcars used to run there. So the fact that it kind of chiaroscuro in the sense that there's light and dark, there's modern and traditional, and they literally are side by side in Pittsburgh. So I thought it would be a great place to set a mystery series. Everybody does New York and Chicago and LA or New Orleans, I guess. I thought Pittsburgh would make a great place. And so I'm really pleased that I get to set the series there.
Well, it is a good backdrop. And in many ways, I think Baltimore has a similar story. I'm not sure how much of the modern technology we have embraced, but of course, there is quite a bit of that going on in the gentrification, as you say. So I think we're trying to reach out into modern world with one foot in the past.
Yeah.
The only thing
That's-
I can add to that is that being from Baltimore, Pittsburgh is our mortal enemy in football.
Yes, I know that. In fact, I think we're playing the Ravens
Yes,
on
we are.
Sunday. Yes. Well, the thing about being from Pittsburgh, you have a lot of mortal enemies because Cleveland's a mortal enemy too.
That's
You know?
true. That's true.
We have a lot of mortal enemies, and those are just in the team itself. So
That
But
is very
the thing
true.
that I like about writing this series, seriously, is my lead character, Daniel Rinaldi, has a foot in both worlds. He comes from a blue-collar background. His father was an alcoholic beat cop. And so he was the first one in his family to go to college, to get an advanced degree, to wear a jacket and tie. So he has both of those things in him. He has that blue-collar Pittsburgh part in him, which I think contributes to his stubbornness. He can be ornery. He's kind of a maverick in the psychological profession. And yet he's very smart and sophisticated. And so he has a foot in both worlds. And I think that and the opportunity to let readers know, because these books are in the first person, I think readers get a really interesting look at what the mind of a therapist is like. Because a number of times in the books, I'll show a fairly extensive therapy session where we see Daniel as a therapist. I mean, most of the books are about his passion to be kind of an amateur sleuth and how he gets involved in a bunch of crimes that he shouldn't be getting involved in. And much to the Pittsburgh police's chagrin, he sort of becomes a media figure, you know, one of those talking heads on CNN. So he has a high status as someone who is involved in these high-profile crimes. And that creates a lot of tension between him and the police department. Even though he has a contract with them and works as a paid consultant to them, most of the cops with whom he works don't like him, because he's an amateur and he gets involved in things he shouldn't get involved in. And they also don't like him because he's a therapist. And most of them are pretty suspicious. As one of my characters says, therapy, that's for mooks and wingnuts.
Well, it's obvious that your clinical background has an influence in your writing. Is the reverse also true? Does your writing background have an effect in your practice in any way?
Well, I think it does in two ways. First of all, because I was a Hollywood screenwriter and TV writer for 17 years. My patients and I speak the same language. They talk about having Act 2 problems in a screenplay. I know exactly what they're talking about. When they talk about their performance anxiety, when they're going to go pitch to a studio, I pitched 1,000 times. So my experience as a writer, I think, has helped in my work as a therapist. Also, the thing about really intense psychotherapy is your patient is telling you a story and talking about the elements of their life and seeking a way to weave those elements into something that makes a kind of sense so that they can make sense of their own behavior or see where the repetitive patterns are. Well, I think because I've been a storyteller my whole life, the fact that I'm a writer, that I'm a creative person, that I'm an author of many narratives, I think that actually helps when wedded to my clinical acumen, such as it is. When wedded together, it kind of helps me help them understand the story of their lives. And there is a narrative to each of our lives. And I think because I think both as a therapist and as a writer, I'm able to help them identify the elements of that narrative.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
We recently did an interview with a licensed clinical professional counselor, and we discussed the difference between psychopaths and sociopaths and their appearance in crime fiction. Have you ever treated any of these diagnoses? Does literature get it right?
Well, it's hard to say because most of the time in both clinical practice and in schooling, the terms psychopath and sociopath are often interchangeable. What's become more clear as we understand more about criminal behavior is we tend to now look at psychopaths as people who are willing to do violence or be dangerous, who don't care about lives and society, whereas sociopaths the prevailing or dominant trait is a lack of remorse or caring. It's a psychopath goes on a killer spree. A sociopath works on Wall Street in 2008. And so, you don't have to go around killing people and dismembering them and all these other horrible things if